Hey everybody, welcome to Do You Believe on Paranormal Zone TV. We're up and running, and tonight we're going to have a fabulous show because guess what? I have Keith Johnson. And Carl may call in. I was hoping that he would. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Keith Johnson. Now, he is a demonologist. He is the author of Paranormal Reality Series. Oh, here, let me show you a picture of Carl and Keith. And he is also the a lecturer, founder with his wife Sandra of Near Paranormal, a paranormal group in New England. And Keith, are you a docent at the Slaughter Mill in Rhode Island?
Yes, Carl and I are both docents there at Old Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island.
All right. And also, for those who may not know this, let me go back here. Keith and his brother were the first paranormal investigators to work on the 1971 case file of the Harrisville Haunting, the Perron Family. You know the story, which inspired the movie The Conjuring. Also, Keith and his brother, let me show this picture again, were featured on Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters. They were demonologists, and I know you all remember that if you ever watched Ghost Hunters, which was fabulous when it first started. So, Keith, is there anything you want to add to that? Oh, is there anything you want to add to that, Keith?
You pretty much said it very correctly. Very good. Thank you.
You know,
thank you very, very much.
Oh gosh, Keith, let me bring you on. Hey everybody, this is Keith Johnson. Hey Keith. Hey, you know what, Keith? I had no idea. All these years, I had no idea about your family story. Your family story was on The Haunting. It was an episode, let me show this. It was an episode on The Haunting called Dangerous Games. Now, Keith, when I saw that, I went over today and I was going to listen to that episode, but I thought, I want Keith to tell the story. And when I found out you were doing the Ouija board, oh my goodness. So, Keith, please tell us your story.
Well, that's just one of the things that my early experiences with the paranormal. We had things going on in our house, and it was a new house. Now, that was very, very old, but our house was new, and when we were young children, and some strange things would happen now and then, and some were frightening, some were not, but of course, to be teenagers, and my sister is 12 years old, my brother and I, being twins, same age, we're 14 years old, and they decided they were going to communicate with the Ouija board to find out just who this spirit was that was making its presence known in our house. So that's when things got a little out of hand. They got the Ouija board and they started communicating it. Now, my mother told us that when she was a teenager, she, of course, like a lot of teenagers, had played with the Ouija board and received some answers, some others, but we decided we were going to give it a try. Now, my brother was the one who led these sessions. He was kind of the leader in this. So I did it a few times, but after a while I didn't want to play anymore because I did get a rather bad feeling about it that we shouldn't be doing this. So I was the hesitant one. My brother takes it out, and so he and my sister began communicating quite regularly. And this is something I like to point out. This happens sometimes. And often with young people, with teenagers, this happens. They start to play with the Ouija board. They start to get answers, and these answers sound very interesting. Pretty soon they're hooked, and they want to do this more and more. It got to the point where I had stopped, but my brother and sister were having nightly sessions doing this because they started contacting a few certain entities that would come on pretty regularly and answer questions. And those who, I'm sure most people listening are familiar with the basic witchboard and with the Ouija board, but just in case, I did bring one here.
Oh, let me put you on full screen.
See?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Mystifying Oracle. Now, I don't use this. I'll tell you why I have this. Recently, I was my team and I were at a client's home, and she had problems from using this too. And so she asked me to take it with me. So I did, but before I take anything like this, I bless it. I do a blessing over it. I try to neutralize it in case there's any spirit attachments. I did prayers over it, and I anointed it with blessed water and blessed oil. So I'm certainly not going to reactivate it by using it, but I just want to show people what it basically looks like.
Yeah. Awesome.
And of course, there's the basic Ouija board most people are familiar with. Here's the planchette. There's the planchette, and of course, that's how you get. It's a pretty smooth board, and that's how you get answers by putting this on and asking the spirit to move your fingers, your hands across the board. Now, you've got to think about this. Some people think it's just a game, but you are asking a spirit to move your hand, move your fingers against your will. You know, you're allowing it, but you're not deciding where your hands are going to go to. Now, I have to say that I think much of the time when people do this, it's subconscious. You want an answer, you want to figure out these answers, you're figuring out the answers for yourself, so your subconscious mind can kind of take over and kind of play devil's advocate and move it for you. But there are times when a spirit presence does invade and starts using these boards to communicate with people. And that's how spirits sometimes get a hold over people, get a hold in a house, because you're essentially inviting it in and giving it permission.
All right, so...
Now, I believe that when I was in my house, I had experienced it. My brother and sister had experienced it, but they wanted to really communicate with this spirit. So one night, they asked the spirit its name, and it spelled out Sylvia, spelled out the name Sylvia on the board. And they asked spirit, whatever it is. And they asked, one night my brother and sister asked, "Where are you in this house, Sylvia?" And it spelled out cellar, C-E-L-L-A-R. So my brother and sister decided they were going to go to the cellar. They went on the cellar stairs, turned on all the lights, and they were waiting for a sign from Sylvia. They waited about, I guess, 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, and nothing happened. And they decided, well, my brother said, "We're not getting anything, let's go back upstairs." Suddenly, they hear a knock, 3 knocks in succession. So 3 even knocks. After that, my brother looked around and said, "I wonder if that was just something like mice or squirrels or something." After he said that, there were 3 percussive booms on the wall. So they knew that something was communicating. Now, 3 in a row, of course, that is a sign of, it can be used as a sign of a demonic spirit. I'm sure many people are familiar with that it's considered an insult to the Holy Trinity, the 3 knocks in a row. But that's what they got. We didn't realize what that was at the time. And so then they're hooked. My brother and sister are hooked. They're communicating with a real spirit. And then this spirit, Sylvia, started making little predictions here and there. Some of them actually came true. My brother asked, is a friend of mine going to call? And they said, "Yes, your friend's going to call right now." Seconds later, the phone rings, and it's that person. Things like that, little predictions here and there. But then things started to go a little on the sinister side. Suddenly, Sylvia stopped communicating, and all it would do is go to no. When they asked questions, it would go over to no, and they thinking, "Sylvia, that's not very nice." But Sylvia was not communicating anymore. It became very hard. Even when they tried to push to another letter, it was very, very difficult. The planchette seemed to be stuck on the board, even though it's a very smooth surface. And then my sister, when she was playing, began getting some very, very rude language, very, very vulgar Sylvia. Now, I think this is a case where something that was pretending to be a human spirit was actually not a human spirit. And these spirits, of course, will sometimes, they have no reservation about picking on a lone teenager or a troubled young person or somebody with mental illness or phobias. They have no reservation of picking on somebody like that to gain more of a foothold. So things started, the communication became very, very negative after that, and actually increased the paranoia inside our house there.
Oh.
Yeah, it actually increased the paranormal activity. For one thing, my sister was standing in a room, and all of a sudden she was pushed. I saw her. She was standing in the dining room. In the middle of a sentence, she was suddenly shoved by an unseen hand. That frightened her very, very badly. Myself, of course, my brother wanted to communicate more and more. My brother, being an insomniac, had moved his bed up, of course, the so-called Sylvia spirit was. He began seeing some kind of a form. He thought it was me at first walking around without my shoes on. He didn't hear any footsteps. He kept seeing this form walk by the curtains and walk around. And he called. He said, "Keith, is that you?" And there was no answer. So he realized it wasn't me. Then one evening, it was like early morning hours. He was just getting to sleep. But he was wide awake at the time. Like I said, he's an insomniac. He was trying to get to sleep. All of a sudden, he feels that he's being watched. He looks over, and there's a woman over the bed looking right at him. Very strange-looking woman. Human-looking, but she had her hair. She was dressed in an old gray dress with her hair done up in a bun, kind of an old-fashioned look to her. A little disheveled, and she just stared at him with this icy stare. And he didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say, and she was there for several seconds, and then she just faded. Like a curtain, she faded from the waist up and was gone. So Carl he thought, nobody is ever going to believe me that I've seen this. Meanwhile, myself, I was still up in the bedroom we shared upstairs. It started happening more and more, where I'd hear voices outside of the window. And of course, I heard these voices when I was very young, when I was about 5 years old. My mother told me I was imagining it, but here I am 15 years old now, and I knew I'm wide awake. I'm 15 years old. I know I'm not imagining this. I'm not a little kid. And these voices came closer and closer. I heard laughing, talking, and laughter outside the window. You couldn't understand what was being said, but I heard this almost maniacal laughing outside the window. And it kept getting closer and closer and closer, until finally, it was in the middle of a rainstorm, a thunder and rainstorm. It went right up to the window and went to all three windows in the bedroom and laughed under each one. I could hear it moving. And it went in a counterclockwise direction. Now, I didn't understand it at the time, but these are all signs of an inhuman spirit, a non-human spirit. It will go counterclockwise. It will come in threes. So it went to all three windows in a counterclockwise direction. It was only years later that I realized this was a sign of the demonic spirit.
It was. Wow. Okay, so
yeah.
What else what happened after all of this?
There was one thing after another. One night, my father and my brother heard what sounded like thudding footsteps up on the roof. It was nighttime. They heard these heavy footfalls, almost like a giant was walking on the roof outside. They ran outside. They looked, and no one was there. Just this percussive pounding on the roof. And more things happened, and we realized that something was not right, and we eventually came to believe that a demonic spirit had been called in, a spirit that had never walked the earth in human form, at least not humanity as we know it. So we called in our friends, the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren, of course, and they came. My parents became very friendly with Ed and Lorraine, and Ed and Lorraine paid a social visit. They had dinner with us, and a very, very nice evening. They were over a couple of times for dinner, and this particular night, They came over and they were investigating what was happening in our house. And what they did, Ed went downstairs. He did some religious provocation. I don't know what he saw or experienced in our basement, but he went down by himself, did some religious provocation. He came upstairs. I could tell he had experienced something by the expression on his face. He just was very, very dead serious.
Wow.
And he looked at Lorraine and just nodded and said, yes, this is it. So I knew that. What they decided to do was, they said, this place needs to be blessed. It needs to be blessed right now. An inhuman spirit has been called in. And of course, we shared with them about how the Ouija board had been used. Now, again, that's an invitation. That's called the law of invitation. Something was obviously already there, but I think what we had done by doing that is open up doors. And again, I was the more cautious one, but other spirits in perhaps as well, or at least give that spirit a greater foothold. So I was sent out to find a clergy person, and of course I'm going out in the early evening. I've got to find a clergy person. Fortunately, I found a Episcopal priest in town that I knew personally. I quickly explained the situation to him. He blessed some water. Produced holy water, and then came to our house. Very graciously came to our house and performed a complete blessing in the basement of our home, where the main disturbance seemed to be. Fortunately, that did seem to take care of it. And my brother blamed himself for getting our parents' house haunted. I mean, certainly there were spirits there. There was at least one spirit entered there beforehand. But playing with the Ouija board really seemed to open things up. And that's why that episode of A Haunting is called Dangerous Games. The blessing did seem to work. It seemed to work for quite a while. After a while, some disturbances seemed to come back, but they weren't like they were. They weren't nearly like they were. And, excuse me, myself, I did a lot of prayer. I did a lot of praying. I read the Bible so I would not be attacked in my own home that I lived with. And I did not want to be attacked. I did not want to call this in, so I just rebuked it in the name of Jesus Christ. And that seemed to keep me safe personally, and my sister as well.
What about Carl?
Carl was basically kept safe, but he did a lot more experimentation with the paranormal and the occult than I did. We were both fascinated with spirits. My sister was fascinated too, but my sister Cindy, most of her experimentation was just confined to reading. She would read, and she wouldn't really do active experimentation with it. My brother, he did a little active calling in spirits, but he kind of toned it down after this happened. So he would receive signs here and there, but it was nothing like it was. And basically, we were not troubled very much by spirit presence again in that house.
What did you do with the Ouija board?
Well, my sister, we put it away, actually. My brother and sister put it away. My sister became a little curious some years later. This is when we were young adults. She became a little curious, so she took the Ouija board, she found it and took it out again, began playing with it and asking for things, and she supposedly was contacted by the spirit of serial killer Ted Bundy. I'll remember Ted Bundy,
Yeah.
Serial killer. And she was fascinated with criminal law. She studies that quite a bit. But she was very fascinated with Ted Bundy, and it's actually gave her a sign. She asked, "Are you Ted Bundy?" And her bed started shaking, and that freaked her out, of course. It started giving threatening messages again. She said, "Okay, the same thing's happening as happened years before. It's getting threatening messages. Something's really bad here. I'm going to stop right now." And she put it outside. She didn't destroy it. She didn't give it to somebody. She just put it outside on the stone wall in front of our house. The next day it was gone. Presumably somebody drove by, saw it, I would think, and picked it up. That's probably what happened to it. So perhaps somebody else inherited the same problems. I don't know, because I don't know what happened to it. but that seemingly ended the spirit connection in our house.
Just by having the cleansing of the house, that it ended. Nothing more. And any problems with any of you personally because of this?
I think that I personally feel that we've been watched over by good spirits and negative spirits, and there is evidence of this. There is very, very much uncanny evidence of this. And of course, as you know, we talked to Bill Bean, my friend Bill Bean. He knows that spirits, once they're in your life is really never the same. You can have protection, and I believe the Lord will protect you, but you're always watched. Once you're involved in this, you are always watched by positive spirits and negative spirits. And I get messages that I am being watched. There's no doubt in my mind that I am being watched and that there is spirit presence around me. But having said that, I also believe in angelic protection. I have no doubt there has been angelic protection. I have had proof of that in my own life. And when Sandra and I go through a house and we do a cleansing or a house blessing, what we do, we always ask for angelic presence to be with us. It's one thing to say prayers and cast a spirit out of a house, but we don't just leave that vacancy, because that's an empty room. And of course, even Christ spoke about that in the Bible. When a spirit goes out of a man, he looks for several other more wicked spirits and takes them with him. He comes back and sees the house is swept clean and empty, then he takes these other spirits with him. And that's because there's a vacancy. So instead of leaving a vacancy there, we invite angels, we invite angelic power, the Holy Spirit, to come into this house and watch over the family that is living there, and that's what we pray for. So it's not just spirits cast out, leaving a void. It's filled with positive energy, positive spirits. That's what we do. And I believe this is true in people's lives too. It's very true in my life, true in my brother's life, true in my sister's life. But there's always signs. You will always get signs that something is watching you. Just when you think that nobody's watching, you will get that sign, and it will come in very, very mysterious ways, ways that you yourself will recognize.
All right, so since we're on the topic of Ouija board, what about, I asked you about this movie that's going viral, this Veronica, where her boyfriend died in a motorcycle accident, and she wanted to contact him through the Ouija board. And I didn't see the movie. I'm not sure. I think what happened was that she contacted her father, but I'm not sure if it really was her father. But then soon after, she died.
That's a terrible tragedy. I'm not sure of all the details in the story, but it does sound familiar because these things do happen. Very, very terrible tragedy. And what I believe happened there is out of heartbreak for her boyfriend and the loss of her father, she tried to contact them through the Ouija board. Some spirit heard her cry, but it wasn't necessarily a human spirit. And these spirits are masters of manipulation. They are mimics. They can mind people. They can get somebody's voice exactly or somebody's mannerisms, such as in the case of possessions. But even with the Ouija board, they can give messages, sometimes secret messages that only that person would know. And then they're hooked because the spirit has masqueraded and deceived them. They're masters of deception.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but Keith, there are other instances where there's been a lot of tragedy by people using the Ouija board. Now, how can that be? Is it a demon that's actually causing this? How does that happen, Keith?
Well, there could be a number of reasons. It could be if somebody has a psychosis, of course, that can feed into it. But when it's actual spirit involvement, again, you're asking a spirit. In a way, I would call it a minor form of possession. A lot of people would not think of that. When you find a thing, spirit manifestation, they are taking your hands and moving them independently of your motor control. If, at the worst, it's actually entering into you and taking control of your motor control and spelling out these words. And a spirit can turn around and say, well, they gave me permission. They gave me permission to do it. I'm just taking their invitation. I'm just accepting it. So that's the way but it gets very complicated. It can get very, very involved. Unfortunately, people can get addicted to it.
Oh,
It
yeah.
sounds strange that somebody could be addicted to the Ouija board. It's not substance abuse, but then again, it's a mental obsession. My friend Ryan Buell, and we remember Ryan Buell from the TV series Paranormal State. He dealt with a case where a woman was when he was finally called into her case. This woman was literally addicted to the Ouija board. She began getting actual communications from this, and she had a spirit, like a spirit who talked to her all the time. But this became so obsessive, she eventually lost friends. She didn't communicate with friends. She didn't go out to socialize. Just first thing in the morning, with her morning cup of tea, she'd sit down with the board, and that would be her daily exercise. It's just using the board, communicating with her spirit friend. She got to the point where she needed no other friends. That became such an obsession, morning, noon, and night. Around the clock sometimes she would talk obsessively to this spirit on the Ouija board and get these answers. Many of them had validation. They would predict things and tell things. But it got to the point where she hardly had any life of her own anymore. Terrible things started happening around her, but she still went back to her spirit friend. And finally, through urging of family and people intervened, they urged her to get in touch with somebody. That's how she got in touch with Ryan Buell. And she was almost, by the time Ryan Buell and his team got there from Penn State, she was almost beyond the point of no return. She had just gotten help in the nick of time because she was about the point of no return. She was about to surrender her total life to this Ouija board. And fortunately, she got counseling. Ryan and his team came in. They brought in clergy as well. She was finally, of course, she needed psychological help for this too, because it was an addiction that she had to break, just with a spirit that cannot be seen. And to her friends and family, that was just, she was going crazy. That's all she wanted to do. But fortunately, she was able to wean herself away from it. She broke the habit. And as far as I know, last I know, she's living a very normal life. So that is a case that did have a happy ending.
Oh, wow. I know I've had this lady on my show before, and she contacts spirits through the Ouija board, and she gets these big, long answers. And she says that all her spirits are good spirits. Nothing bad comes through. I can't remember how she does it. I think she does this prayer and whatever before and asking only the good spirits to come through. And she's been doing this for years. Is that possible to really get like angels coming through on a Ouija board?
My personal belief is no. No, that's my personal belief. Based on my experience and studying this for years, the experiences of others, I do not believe that good spirits come through the Ouija board. I know a lot of people would disagree, but I do not believe that angels come through and communicate through a Ouija board. That I do not believe. I believe these spirits can appear nice, they can manipulate, but there have been times when confronting spirits, and of course, Sandra and I, of course, are of the Christian faith, and that's how we approach this. That's my total approach to demonology, is through the Christian faith. That's our personal belief. But if it gets to that point, I test the spirits. As it says in the Bible, in the New Testament, 1 John, it says, test the spirits, prove the spirits to see if they are of God. So that's what I do in cases like this. And this can also get into collecting EVPs.
Oh, I was going to ask you.
Spirit voices.
Yes.
I know people that have whole collections collections of spirit voices
Yes.
that they've recorded either on digital or analog recordings, sometimes on video. Now, I myself have a collection of spirit voices because I've been on many cases where I've recorded, but I'll tell you, I no longer ask questions. For years, I did ask questions of spirits. I no longer ask questions of spirits. In fact, there's no need to, actually, because sometimes if you're interviewing a client, if there is real spirit activity, these spirits will come through in the interview. They'll want to chime in while you're talking to the client. We've gotten some actual Class A EVPs on spirit recordings while just interviewing the clients themselves. They're telling their story, and it will just chime in. Usually very sarcastically, too. There was a client we were helping some years ago, and she lives in Connecticut, and she was a victim of satanic ritual abuse. And that's a whole story in itself, satanic ritual abuse. And SRA, this woman, when she was a young girl, was forced into satanic practices. Just a young girl, about 6, 7 years old, she was forced to participate in satanic practices. And she was brainwashed, and that's such a terrible, terrible thing. She's a wonderful, wonderful person, and she counsels people today who have gone through spiritual problems. It's a wonder she turned out as well as she did. But of course, in her adult life, adolescence and adult life, she had problems because of this upbringing, and that's a frightening thing to think of, where you have repressed memories. It's almost like a UFO abduction experience. You have these repressed memories, and you don't know if something's real or not. But all of a sudden, something comes back to you. It's, my God, did I actually do this? Did I actually do this? She had terrible memories of actually being put inside a grave. And I know it sounds terrible, but she was put inside a grave as a young girl and forced to hold a corpse's hand.
Oh, my.
And just these things that during therapy and years later just came back to her. So that's why she does her best to help people now, today. But anyway, we were helping her because she did have, not surprisingly, she did have some spirit activity. And we did a blessing in her house without asking questions. I just had my recorder on for verification. I do bless my equipment too. I bless it. And we played the recording back while we were blessing her house. A spirit voice said, "Help her," called out, "Help her."
Wow.
And that's kind of telltale.
Yeah.
It sounds like it might be a nice spirit, a good spirit to say that. But several months later, about a year later, her boyfriend began doing some renovations in her apartment. Now, anybody who's dealt with a extended period of time with spirit manifestations know that when you start doing renovations in your house or apartment, for whatever reason, it's going to create a disturbance, and it might cause spirit activity to reoccur. That's why I always recommend when somebody moves into an apartment or a house, always have it blessed. Always have it blessed. You can't go wrong by having it blessed. Well, they were doing the renovations. We came over, and of course, for the interview, I put my tape recorder on right away. And my wife Sandra says, "Well, we love what you're doing here. This is wonderful. This looks great." And we have a voice that comes out and says, "Amazing stuff."
Oh.
So I'm very sarcastic.
Oh, awesome.
But this sounded like it's just somebody in the room with us. It just said, "Amazing stuff."
Wow, that's awesome. Keith, what about seances? That's another form of communication.
Yes, yeah, that is another form of communication. It's something I don't agree with, this type of divination. And that, again, is asking a spirit to, especially people usually are sitting around a table to contact a spirit. Usually they're holding hands or touching fingers to create this energy, this conduit, and you're asking a spirit to come in and manifest itself through these people. Sometimes there's a trance medium there. medium is just what it implies. It's the medium between the spirit and the physical communication. Sometimes this medium will get answers, will divine answers. Sometimes if it's a full trance medium, sometimes the person will be taken over and a spirit will speak through it. And I've seen that happen. Again, when I was young, I did some experimentation. Of course, I made all the mistakes and everything like that. I wish I hadn't, but then again, you learn by your mistakes, But I've seen trance mediums do this. I've seen spirits supposedly speak through them. Now, again, of course, a lot of times it's subconscious. It's your subconscious just speaking through you. You want an answer. Sometimes you're figuring out the answer yourself. But it is a very dangerous practice because a spirit could take that invitation literally. And I do believe that spirit can turn around and say, well, I was invited. I have a legal right. I have a perfect right to be here. I was invited in. Maybe they didn't know it was me they were inviting in, but they invited a spirit in, so I have a legal right to be here. And spirits will do that. They will claim that they have a legal right. I know, now this is not a seance that I attended, but I know that some years ago at UCLA, they used to do I don't know if they still do it at UCLA, but they do a Halloween thing in the dorms. They used to do it where they try to call up the spirit of Houdini, Harry Houdini, the great magician and an escape artist.
Yeah.
They try to call him up annually on Halloween because that's, of course, Houdini died on Halloween, and that was his personal favorite holiday. But they tried to call up the spirit of Houdini. All of a sudden, one of the young girls, teenage girl in the dorm, young college student, all of a sudden she bolts upright, and she has this strange look in her eyes. Her eyes open up very, very wide and take on a glassy appearance. And she started swaying back and forth like a cobra.
Oh.
And they kept saying, who are you? Who are you? And she wouldn't answer. They kept saying, are you Houdini? Are you the spirit of Houdini? All of a sudden, in this unearthly voice, she answers, who is Houdini?
Oh, no.
That stopped them. They stopped it right there.
Oh.
She came out of it with no memory of what happened at all. So that stopped it for a while. I don't know if there's still students that do that there, but that broke up their seance session right there.
Oh, my gosh. Now, what about...
There's another one that I...
Go ahead,
Yes,
honey. Go.
Oh, I was just saying there's another seance that I was not present at, but I saw the records of, I saw a testimony of, where there was a woman who was, her familiar spirit was a very nice spiritual entity that would come and give advice and everything. There happened to be a Christian minister. A Christian minister was observing this seance, and this woman went into a trance, and the spirit started speaking through her, and started telling her all these things, how beautiful the afterlife is, how peaceful it can be. And since they were speaking of the afterlife, the Christian pastor asked, do you believe in Jesus Christ? The woman hesitated. That was influenced by the spirit. She hesitated and then smiled and said, Jesus is the King of the world. And the pastor said, and do you also believe that Jesus shed his blood for the remission of sins? All of a sudden, this wild look, she just roared. She just foamed at the mouth and roared, and just jumped at him, and they had to pull her off. She went trying to claw his eyes. They had to pull her off. This nice, sweet spirit. Turned out it wasn't such a nice, sweet spirit at all. And because he'd used religious provocation, they had to hold her down. And it's lucky he escaped there without her after that.
Holy cow. Okay. Now what about...
This is a very danger.
What about those that supposedly contact the supposedly demon Zozo, and they get this Zozo, and I think there's another word too, is mom or mommy or something, is supposed to be a demonic, and they're getting this on the Ouija board. Do demons come through and let you know? Yes. Oh, they do. Oh.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. There's many manifestations of Zozo. I know John, my friend and colleague John Zaffis, of course, he's Ed Warren his nephew, his blood nephew. And of course, through the Warrens, John and I have been friends for many, many years, very, very close friends.
Yeah.
And John and I talk, we have a bunch of laughs because you have to, so you don't crack up because things get so heavy in this field. We refer to it as the work, demonology as the work. And, but John has come across this a lot. Clients contacting him that have come over the Zozo spirit. It's come through the Ouija board. And that's more and more common. It's more and more common. Now, I do not believe it's one spirit, Zozo. It may have started out with one spirit, but of course, there are many, numerous entities out there. So if somebody's asking who's going to come through, a spirit will come through. Well, I think I'll come through as Zozo, and I'll really get their attention if I spell out Zozo. So I think that's becoming more and more common. More and more spirit entities are coming through with the name of Zozo. And because it's a very popular name, and people expect to come across it. So yes, a lot of people are coming across the Zozo spirit.
Yeah, they are. And it is because I think a couple of Rosemary Golly and Darren Evans, they wrote a book on Zozo, and Darren Evans had this awful experience, and his wife, I think, got possessed as well.
That's a terrible thing when that happens. But yes, it can lead to that. At its most severe, it can lead to that.
So
now, possession is very, very rare, but of course it does happen. And these spirits are opportunists. They look for opportunities.
Mm-hmm. What is your advice to anybody that wants to use a Ouija board, Keith?
Well, my first advice is don't. My second advice is don't. It's like people ask. I've had people ask me, how do you use it safely? Some people advise that they can use it safely. I've known people that say, I've used it for years and I've never had a problem.
Mm-hmm.
All I can say is I know what's happened. I know what happened in my house as teenagers when we were growing up. I've seen it happen to others. Of course, some people will say, well, maybe you just were unlucky. You got the bad spirits. But I really think it's just too dangerous to call up these spirits through a Ouija board and try to communicate with them. And some people use it dozens of times, hundreds of times, and they seemingly do not have a problem. Some people use it once or twice, and all heck breaks loose. Why? I don't know. There could be a number of reasons for that. Maybe the family has a spirit in the house or a spirit attachment. It could be a generational spirit, all sorts of things. But it's just not worth the danger, because there is a very, very real inherent danger. And of course, somebody uses the Ouija board doesn't mean they're going to be possessed right away, but it can start a chain reaction.
Mm-hmm. Can you get an Can you get an attachment from using the Ouija board like you can in paranormal investigating?
Yes, you can. You can. I believe that my brother, of course, has lived in many different places since we've lived in the house where we grew up in North Situate, Rhode Island. But he has gotten signs. He's gotten the 3 knocks on the door in different places. He was laying down to take a nap. He got three knocks on his door. He thought it was my aunt in the next room. He went in the next room to look for her, and she's asleep on the bed. Just things like that. But again, once you cross that line, you'll be watched. You'll always be watched by a spirit presence, and that will be in your life forever. You just pray that you have the protection, that God is watching over you, that Christ, of course, calling upon the name of Christ is a protection that has protected me many, many times, and I would not be in that field without the protection of Christ. And that's my personal belief.
Keith, when do you do exorcisms?
Yes, rarely, but yes, I have done exorcisms.
Okay, so if you do exorcisms or any kind of cleansing, I think you're Catholic, aren't you?
Actually, I'm Protestant, but I'm very familiar with Catholicism.
Okay.
I've worked with Catholicism quite a bit.
Do you ask for the demon's name? Do you need to know who the demon is in order to continue with your cleansing?
When I do the cleansing, usually I do not ask for the name. It's just I know that's really going in an avenue that I would rather not go in when I'm doing a cleansing. I could, because I do record these things, but I would rather, the most I do is ask for a sign of departure. If I've told the spirit or blessed the house, sometimes I will ask for a sign of departure. In the name of Jesus, I will ask for that with protection. But I do not ask for the spirit's name. The only time I would do that is usually it would be in a case of demonic possession, because that gives you some power when you have the name, casting it out.
Okay. Because I think with the Catholics, I'm Catholic, they ask for the demon's name, and they won't stop until they get the demon's name.
Right. And that's something I would only do in a case of possession, because it is very, very helpful. In fact, it's usually essential, depending on the strength of the demonic spirit. It's usually essential to get their name and, if possible, to get the time that they entered that person. As much information as possible. Very, very difficult to do. Very, very difficult to do, because the spirit will do anything to avoid detection, to avoid giving its name. As a rule, it will never give you its name, its true name, its true spiritual name. It will give a symbolic name. Say if it's a spirit of hate or a spirit of lust, that's what it will define itself as, but not its real spiritual name.
All right. My next question to you is, you were the first to get involved with the Harrisville Haunting. How did you get involved in that? You were young, too, when you got involved.
Yes, I was a teenager. I was a young teenager, and the way I got involved with it was I had been praying a lot. I had a feeling. It seemed to come to me first, and I had a knowing while I was praying. Now, I did not hear an actual voice, but it became a knowing within me that I was going to be contacted by a family, and I was going to go to help them, and that eventually I got while I was praying in the spirit. And soon afterwards, then, of course, the story is I put an ad in a paper, because there was no internet back then. This is back in the 70s. I put an ad in the paper that the group I was in, based at Rhode Island College, that we investigate unusual disturbances, parapsychology. We were a parapsychology club. But it was answered 3 weeks later, and the woman said, "I'm Carolyn Perron. I have lived in this house for a few years. It's an 18th century house in Harrisville, Rhode Island. We have many, many spirit presence here. It has become unbearable here. It has become very hostile. I have daughters that need help. Would you please come and investigate?" So we did. Our group was Parapsychological Investigation and Research Organization, PYRO for short. And we did come to the Harrisville house, and we experienced activity there. It was undeniable that there was spirit activity there. And again, I had a premonition, and it became very, very detailed, because as a teenager, I worked a landscape job in the daytime, and I was at the Sprague Mansion doing the beautiful mansion in Cranston, Rhode Island, but it's allegedly haunted. And I kept feeling that there was a spirit in the cupola up on that mansion, and that it was warning me. To me, it was saying, "I know where you were going tonight. I'm going to be watching you." So I prayed, and I took I put myself in a state of grace. And of course, a state of grace is when you're praying and you're asking for protection. It doesn't mean that you are a holy person. It just means that you're humbly asking for God's protection and guidance as well. and discernment. So we came to the house on a late August afternoon, early August evening, very, very hot. As soon as I set foot on that property, it was like a force field. I could tell it was a force field. It was just almost pushing me back. It was like an electrical charge that was just taking energy from me. And I said, there's no denying this. There's no denying this at all. We came and we met the Perron family, beautiful, beautiful family, and they took to me very, very fast. They took to me very fast. I think the daughters really liked me because I had very, very long hair at the time. I was, it was very, but we came in the house, met the family. I got along with the family very, very well. My brother and his girlfriend Donna at the time, who was the chairperson of Pyro, they were in the kitchen area, and my brother heard somebody walking upstairs, heavy boot steps. And Mr. Perron, we met Roger Perron, but he had gone out. He had to leave on a business deal. So he said, I thought there was nobody upstairs. Who's upstairs? And Carolyn just, that happens all the time. That's just, we hear footsteps all hours of the day and night. That's just when nobody's up there. That's just every day that happens, every night. And meanwhile, the girls had latched on to me, and they were all excited to have people there visiting them. They grabbed onto my wrists, gave me a tour of the whole property and everything. We went into the barn. The barn had really got the terrible emanations you could feel inside the barn. Then they took me upstairs to one of their bedrooms. Meanwhile, Carl had gone upstairs to use the bathroom upstairs. He looked down the hallway, and there's a black cloud. It's a black, misty cloud, and it's coming right toward him. And just for him, it dissipated. It didn't really take on a humanoid shape, but it was like a thick black mass coming right toward him, and it dissipated. Wow. So later on, the girls took me upstairs, and we sat on the bed, and they were telling me how frightened they were. This is the room we're most frightened in. Some of us share this bedroom, and we're very, very frightened. Now, there was the window in that bedroom that the humidity, it couldn't be closed for weeks. This window had been open. It was just, the humidity was so thick that it was swelled. The wood was swelled. They could not, they even tried to hammer. They could not push this window down. And so the girls were telling me they were afraid and how scared they were. And I said, well, look, do you have any religious beliefs? They said, oh, yes, we're Catholic. Now, of course, the Perron family, unlike the movie The Conjuring, where they supposedly had no religion, they were actually Catholic. The thing is that the Catholic Church in their vicinity, their diocese, had rejected them because they lived in a haunted house.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yes. In fact, Andrea, the eldest daughter, who was about 15 years old at the time, they actually told her, a priest told her, maybe you'd like to find another place to go worship because people are disturbed by you because of where you lived.
Oh my, no way.
It's just, clergy are people too. They're people too, and, they're not supposed to do that, but people have their limits, and they weren't very understanding to the Perron family. So anyway, I was sitting in the bedroom with the children. They were telling me how afraid they were. My heart just went out to them. And was I frightened? Yes, I was frightened to be there, but I was angry too. I was angry that these children were being bullied like that because I've always hated any type of bullying, especially spiritual bullying, something that you don't normally see. They did see spirit manifestations there, but most of the time it was an invisible force making them frightened. So I said, well, why don't you, when you're afraid, try calling upon the name of Jesus. As soon as I said that, the atmosphere changed. It changed in a second. It was like somebody threw on a switch. It was like we were in an electric bubble, a bubble filled with electricity that was just draining you. And this is all in a split second. It was immediate. And within that second, the window right next to me that could not be shut slammed down with such force it shook the room. It just immediately, when I said the name of Jesus, slammed down, and you could feel in the atmosphere. The girls started screaming. They became frightened. One of them got slapped on the left side of the head, almost throwing her off the bed. She started screaming and crying, holding her head. Now, again, that's a sign of the demonic. It came and slapped on the left side of her head, sign of the demonic.
Oh.
and she's screaming and crying. And I realized, I'm a teenager, but I'm the closest thing to an adult in this room. I have to handle this situation. So I told them, don't be afraid. Call upon Jesus. I said the name of Jesus twice more. So in all times I said the name of Jesus 3 times, it suddenly left the room. They all looked up. They joked it up and said, "It's gone. It's gone." They could tell it was no longer in the room. Now, I'm sure that entity was not impressed by me. At the time, I was about 127, 128 pounds, very, very long hair. I'm sure it was not afraid of me, but it was what I was representing. I'd been reading scripture, and I used the name of Jesus in faith, and it just left the room. It left the room. That thing that was terrifying the children was suddenly the entity that was terrified, and it left the room.
Were you were you brought in first and then the Warrens came in, or were the Warrens?
Yes.
Oh, you were brought in first.
We were brought in first, and of course, we, as I explained, we were good friends with the Warrens. My parents were good friends with them as well. We didn't actually bring them in. What we thought, we talked it over among ourselves, and we thought, maybe we should ask some advice from our good friends Ed and Lorraine. They dealt with spirit cases like this. They've been all over the world. We should at least ask for their advice, tell them what we're going through, and ask for their guidance. So we called them, and they were very, very receptive. They said, well, we'll do more than advise you. We'll come down there and we'll actually participate in this case because it sounds like a very serious situation. We'll participate in this case with you. And that is, in the true story, that's how Ed and Lorraine Warren did become involved.
I heard you. I was listening to to a podcast that you were on, and how Ed and Lorraine Warren got started in the paranormal. And I almost flipped when I heard you tell the story. Could you tell the viewers the story? I couldn't believe it.
How they got involved in the paranormal?
Yes.
Well, they were, Lorraine was always sensitive. She was always sensitive. She always felt that she had a contact with the spirit world. She met her husband. He was in the Navy. Lorraine said they met. They went out to the movies. Lorraine came back and wrote in her journal, "Tonight I met the man I'm going to marry." And they fell very, very deeply in love. What he didn't know was that she was a sensitive, a clairvoyant. What she didn't know that he had grown up in a haunted house himself, very seriously haunted, and so he became obsessed with finding out about these things. They didn't know they had this connection, and one night they broke it to each other that they were both interested in the paranormal for different reasons. Now, Lorraine at the time had not thought of pursuing it, but because of Ed's passion. Now, of course, Ed did his service. He was involved in World War II. He did see action in the South Pacific. I believe his ship was actually attacked. He almost drowned, but fortunately he was still with us. They were married, and of course then they had their daughter Judy, and they were artists. They started out as artists. Ed was a very, very talented landscape painter. He mostly did seascapes and landscapes, very talented. But what they would do, they would get in their station wagon and ride around the country and seek out houses that had a reputation for being haunted. And they start sketching it. Ed would start sketching their house. He'd come and knock on the door. He said, "See, I just did a nice sketch of your house. If you let me in and talk about the haunting that's going on, I'll let you have this for free." So that's how they started, and that's how they started helping out people.
And did it work? I guess it worked.
Oh yes, it did work. It did work. A lot of people. Of course, you have to understand this is again long before the internet, and a lot of people didn't see. That's the thing in haunting, especially diabolical hauntings. The main tactic in oppression, a spirit of oppression, is to make the person think they're all alone. Nobody reaches out. Nobody's going to understand you. Your friends and family will call you crazy, and the church will call you crazy. And unfortunately, often they do. So when somebody comes in and actually wants to talk about it, that's a ray of hope. That's a godsend. So they began going in more and more houses. Then in Monroe, Connecticut, where they lived, they were doing an art exhibit, and of course Ed was secretly painting some of the spirit manifestations and houses he investigated with. He was always doing them, and one of the people organizing the art show said, "Ed, along with some of your paintings, why don't you put some of your haunted paintings in, and just to see how people go for it." And so he did, and the public was very, very receptive, and then that's how their name started becoming known. Now Ed became frustrated, as a lot of people do become frustrated in this field, because you get razzed, people do appreciate it, you do get a certain notoriety, but also you will be subject to ridicule. We're all been through this. Every single one of us in this field has been through it. This terrible ridicule. And finally Ed couldn't take it anymore, and he said, I'm sorry, Lorraine, we've got to stop. I'm only going to go to houses that somebody really, really needs it. But then he went to a Catholic nunnery. He went to a Catholic nunnery and rectory, and he talked to some of the priests. He was visiting this nice place that had a very spiritual atmosphere to it, and it was a nun came to him, an Oriental nun, and told him that you are meant to do this. You are meant to do this. You are meant to help people who are oppressed by spirits. This is what your life calling is. So that's what he decided he was going to do. So they started giving public lectures, and they became very well known for giving their public lectures. That's when my brother and I came in. That's how we met Ed and Lorraine at Rhode Island College, when they were doing their series of lectures when we were still young teenagers. That's how we met them. I myself was feeling a calling. I was feeling a very strong calling. After our experience with the Ouija board in our house, I was feeling a very strong calling to help people who are going through spirit troubles. So meeting Ed and Lorraine was the catalyst. I had prayed, I need an answer, how I'm supposed to pursue this. We met Ed and Lorraine, and that was my answer. And then my brother and I at Rhode Island College were invited to join Pyro, and that's how we all became involved. So that's how it all started for us, and
Wow.
the Warrens, of course, many years before us.
Wow. I just want to get back for a second to the Harrisville Haunting. Now,
Yes.
I've aired many shows with Andrea Perron.
Yeah,
And,
good friend, dear friend Andrea.
And she actually told me, because I asked her during one of the shows, I said, did anybody use the Ouija board? And she admitted that one of her sisters was using the Ouija board, and they told her stop, not to use the board, but she continued. Now, their haunting that occurred, was this before or after? Did you ever find out, did you ever know that they were using the Ouija board?
No, I never did till years later.
Okay.
It wasn't until years later that I found out. But of course, if I had known, I would have shared my story with them. You know, and I know that there were personal dangers with them. But obviously, that house was the wrong. Not that there's any good house to do this in, but you couldn't get much more of a wrong house to use a Ouija board in than the Harrisville house, considering the number of spirits there and the hostility that was going on. Now, there was not all spirit experiences there were not bad, but they were not necessarily negative in the Harrisville house. There was times when they were actually seemed to be protected and saved by an angelic presence that came into that house. And of course, they really, really needed it, and with the negativity that was going on there as well. Because after we left, it was less than a week after we left. We said we'll be back next week. If you need us, call us in the meantime. Well, it was only a few days later. Carolyn had gone to bed. She was sleeping next to her husband, Roger. It was about daybreak. Shortly before daybreak, the wee hours of the morning, suddenly she woke up. She knew something was wrong. And I don't know if this is because I had used religious provocation in that house, but it was about 3 days later. She knew something was wrong, and it was just starting to get twilight, just starting to get morning light in. she smelled a terrible scent in the house. It was a mixture of sulfur and decaying flesh. That's how she could describe it. And she looked, and something was almost like burning, smoldering on her dresser top. And then she looks over. It's very hard to describe what she saw in her bedroom. It was it was a humanoid form, in the form of a woman. But it was no human manifestation. It looked like an older woman, very, very short, wearing a gray dress. The strange thing was that the head was hanging onto the shoulder as if the neck had been broken. And of course, there was a rumor that a woman had hung herself on the property many years ago.
Yeah.
So this manifestation, the head like a broken neck, was just dangling on the shoulder. And the face, what she could see of the face, it was just not human. There were very little discernible features. Carolyn later described it as looking like a desiccated hornet's nest. It was all brown and wrinkled. The hands were not really hands. They were just broken off fingers, skeletal fingers like twigs. And this thing floated around your bed and started saying a very terrible chant of doom. It threatened her, it warned her, "I'll drive you mad with fiery brooms." Now, somebody in that house, what is their greatest fear? Fire, of course, an old house like that. So it tormented Carolyn, said, I'll drive you mad with fiery brooms. I'll drive you mad with death and gloom. I'll drive you out, but 'twill be too late. You'll be dead. And then it looked right down at her and then vanished.
Now, I'm not sure. I think Andrea said that this woman's spirit that was in the house, this entity, was after the father, Roger.
Yes. Now, when they woke up, of course, she was punching Roger, trying to get him to wake up. He was in some kind of somnambulistic state. He could not wake up. But when he woke up, there were actually freshly bleeding gouges on his back. However, the main spirit that seemed to have a dread hatred, a pathological hatred towards Carolyn, it actually did in time seem to covet Roger. It seemed to be very possessive of him. It kind of loved him in a way. Sometimes he would go downstairs, and instead of attacking him, it would start lightly rubbing his back, rubbing his shoulders. And so it did seem to have a thing for Roger, but a jealous hatred for Carolyn. Almost as if it wanted to destroy Carolyn and take her husband and children away from her.
Why? Why do you think that was going on?
Well, there's many. There could be a number of reasons, a number of opinions why this happened. Some say it was representing Mrs. John Arnold, a woman who had committed suicide on the property quite a few years before, and supposedly she wanted a family again. Myself, my personal opinion that perhaps it was oppressing Mrs. John Arnold. Now, of course, there's the whole thing with Bathsheba Sherman,
Oh,
too.
yeah.
And,
What's that? Yeah.
Because when Lorraine walked in, the first thing she said when she came to the Perron house was, "There's a malevolent presence here. Its name is Bathsheba." Now, Bathsheba, of course, was accused of a lot of things, but in reality, she was not. Of course, in the movie, she's portrayed as a satanic witch and who killed her children. Actually, she was a prominent farm woman in the community. She was a member of the Baptist church, and she was buried in hallowed ground. Now, somebody who's thought to be a witch, they don't bury them in hallowed ground.
Mm-hmm.
So, personally, I don't think it was Bathsheba Sherman myself. I think it may have been a spirit, an inhuman spirit. I believe this at the time. I'll always believe this. It was an inhuman entity that was oppressing somebody there, perhaps Mrs. John Arnold. And when Mrs. John Arnold did take her own life, this spirit again was looking for victims. It was looking for victims. The Perron family moves in, a family with several daughters that are young, healthy daughters that are various ages, going up from young child to adolescence, and they're vibrant, young energy. The Perron family is the first first family that broke the bloodline of people that had lived in that house. From the Arnold family, every generation that had lived in that house since 1736 had been an Arnold or related to the Arnolds. The Perron family were the first that broke that bloodline. So when they moved in, for some reason, it really, really started up. Of course, the gentleman who lived there before, who sold the house to them, he would sleep with the lights on all night. He'd keep the lights on all night in his house. And this is verified by neighbors. I've talked to neighbors that knew that this gentleman kept his lights on in the house all night there. And when he sold, he became good friends with the Perron family. When he sold it to the Perron family, it was starting to snow out, so they were going through the snowfall. Roger and this gentleman were going through. The gentleman who had just sold the house to them, he just turned to Roger as they were walking in the snow and said, "Roger, do yourself and your family a favor. Sleep with the lights on all night. Never turn them off." And Roger didn't know what... Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, Roger didn't know what to think of that. Of course, they didn't start off by keeping the lights on all night, but as soon as the children moved in there, they began seeing spirits. But it was Carolyn who was, she was oppressed the most. Terrible things were happening to her. And you could see it. Now, this is a young woman, young mother in her 30s, who looked younger than her age and was very, very beautiful. She was part Native American. She had long, dark hair, the high cheekbones. But you could tell something was wrong. Something was wrong. And you could say she already had dark circles. She had sleep deprivation. Her fingers, even though she spoke calmly, her fingers trembled. And she began aging very, very rapidly. Very rapidly she began aging. So she went from a beautiful woman that looked very, very young for her years to looking, unfortunately, like she'd been through a lot. She started aging prematurely. This house took so much from her. And she lived there as long as she could until one time. They lived there for about 10 years. And then one day she said to her husband, "Roger, you know, I love this house, but I can't live here another winter. I'll not survive." So they finally did have to move out.
Oh my goodness. So when they left, Keith,
Yes.
that house still had activity when they left.
Yes. Yeah, the house did still have activity. One of the daughters came back and was a caretaker for a while there. Lived there as a caretaker. Now the house practically exploded with activity when this daughter came back. It practically exploded with activity. All sorts of things were happening. It was like, I described as kind of a whirlwind in there. Things flying all over the place, dishes breaking against the wall. But the family did look, Carolyn had taken out the family's complete savings to buy this house. It was sold very cheaply. The owner wanted to sell it as soon as he could. But even other families that lived there have experienced things. I know there was a pastor who lived there very briefly, and he had a 19-year-old son. One time the 19-year-old son was there by himself before his father arrived home. He happened to look outside, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And this is in the daytime, there out in the driveway was an old woman just standing there, and she had a crazed look on her face, very, very strange look on her face. And for some reason, she seemed to have an abnormality, as if she had a terrible arthritic condition. Her hands were clawed, and her head was tilting to one side.
Oh my goodness!
Leaning on her shoulder. And he thought, what is this? Did she escape from an elderly house or elderly housing as she got dementia? And he was going to talk to her. He looked outside. He said the look of hatred in her face, looking at him. He didn't dare approach her. So he was about to call the police to say there's some deranged woman out in my driveway. He looked up again. Within a split second, she was gone.
Oh my goodness! Oh my! Oh wow!
Then the pastor came home and his son told him about it. But they didn't experience much more after that. And then, of course, it was bought by another family, and they lived there for quite some time. number of EVP on recording, on audio recording there, while I was in the house. And now, again, I say I don't ask questions of, it's just become too dangerous. Things that have happened, I've seen it's become too dangerous. So I don't ask questions of spirits anymore, unless it's very relevant, for like a sign of departure, but not out of curiosity. But I found out I didn't have to ask questions there. If I was playing it, interviewing the family, they would just speak along. They would just speak along. Now, the family experienced very, very little when they were living there. Things would happen now and then, like lights turn on and off by themselves. Certain chairs would vibrate while they were sitting in them.
Oh my gosh.
One thing that the family did experience, that Carolyn experienced, was a blue light. A blue light came down through the chimney, went across the room rapidly, and came back up. Just within a second.
Wow.
Now, I don't know what that was. I tend to think it was some kind of probe. Might have been some kind of probe. It just this blue electric light looked like a neon electric light just came down the chimney, went across the room, came back up.
Oh my gosh.
One of the strangest things that happened to Carolyn while she lived there, though, and this is very, very strange, and this was not, of course, you need a 5-hour movie to tell everything that you need a documentary to tell everything that they went through there in those 10 years. One time, the strangest thing, she came into the dining area, and suddenly she looked and something had changed. Something was different. The furniture was older, it was rearranged different, and she was in the doorway. She looked in. There's an old dining room table that hadn't been there before, and there's another family sitting down to eat there, and they're wearing clothes from another century.
Oh, that's bizarre. That is
very,
really
very bizarre. And she looked, and there was a mother there trying to call her children, come on, it's time to eat, trying to get them to the supper table. There were 2 young men at the table drinking out of steins, and these young men were chatting with each other, dressed in clothing from another era. All of a sudden, one of them turned around, looked right at Carolyn, did a double take. He saw Carolyn, looked right at, did a double take.
Oh my!
Then he nudged the young man next to him. He turned around, and the other young man pointed right to her, as if to say, "Who's this woman?" And then it faded out. So for one moment, Carolyn was actually the ghost in that house.
Oh yes, I've heard about that. It's like the movie The Others.
It's very much like the others. Very much like the others. Now, she wasn't a spirit. She was a flesh and blood woman. But for a moment, she was the apparition in that house. And it's very much like the others. Now, of course, that wasn't in The Conjuring. Like to tell the whole story, it would just be impossible with one movie. But that's one of the strangest things, what seemed to be an actual time displacement.
Keith, do you think that is how it really is? Do you think that we live on after like that, and we're still cooking and doing whatever with the family, and we look at humans as a ghost? Do you think that's real?
I don't believe that. I don't believe that happens. I know it's a very fascinating theory. I don't believe that happens. I do believe in a resurrection. I do believe there is a resurrection, that when Christ comes again, we will be resurrected. But I do believe there are strange phenomena that go on that we don't totally understand, interdimensional changes that go on. But, of course, you have to remember that house was very, very strange. That house was... Well, instead of having multiple portals, it's almost like the house itself was a portal. And so it's somehow, this house existed in a way that was just open to spirit phenomena, and maybe a dimensional change like that, which for just one moment, Carolyn was in another time, and then it changed. There's all sorts of things we just don't comprehend that go on. Alternate realities, such things as that. things that were just beginning to try to theorize, not even explore, but just theorize. But I'm sure you can watch things on television that they talk about these things all the time, and of course UFO phenomena as well. Sometimes very strange, but sometimes a house that's associated, or a family that's associated with a haunting, will also have UFO phenomena.
Well,
very strange.
Actually, in one of my shows with Andrea, she told me that they did see UFOs.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so Keith, why don't you think? I mean, they had a fascinating story. Why do you think that the Conjuring, they really didn't follow the Perron Family haunting, which is fascinating?
Oh, the true story is much more fascinating.
I know.
The actual events are much more fascinating, but of course it all has to do with selling the film, the budget, and everything. And director James Wan, I mean, he's a master at scare tactics.
Oh,
of course,
yeah.
he did the Saw films and everything. He's a master of scare tactics, and he wanted something. While the names are real, and very strangely, even though he had never seen the house, the set that they made, which was actually, I believe it was in North Carolina, the set they did, and the house itself resembled the house inside, even though the real house, even though James Wan had never seen it.
Very interesting. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he had never seen it, but it did resemble the house almost exactly in some ways, even though he had nothing to go on.
Wow.
The outside of the house in The Conjuring was actually modeled after Lorraine Warren's house.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So what happened with that case?
It's Colorado. I think it was filmed in Colorado.
Oh, is that right? Okay, so
Yeah.
what happened with the case? After you were there, then the Warrens took over, and then how long?
Yes.
And then I think the Warrens were kicked out, weren't they?
Yes, yeah, there was an unfortunate incident that, of course, it was not portrayed this way in the movie, but they came with, of course, Ed always came with a reporter and camera people with him when it was something that was actual spirit phenomena, because he wanted to be able to prove it. He wanted to be able to prove it to the world, to have evidence that these things are going on. So they came with a reporter, with a priest, and Lorraine brought another psychic in. She brought a lady who was sensitive, clairvoyant, and they decided that they were going to contact a spirit through a seance. That's not something that I would personally recommend. They decided that the quickest way to communicate with spirit is through a seance. And so they held a typical seance with the reporter documenting it, and a priest was there, so things, in case things got out of hand, he could intervene. And of course, poor Carolyn, by this time the life is pretty much being sucked out of her. She had lost so much weight, she was almost skeletal, but she was in the room. Children had been put to bed, but a couple of the children, Andrea and one of her siblings, got up and were watching through a crack in the door. So they tried to call up the spirit. I believe they invoked the name of Bathsheba as well. Suddenly, as Andrea watched through the doorway, her mother was taken over. Her mother jolted up and started speaking in this, I don't even know if it was a language. It was just this guttural babbling that seemed to have some kind of cadence to it, but nobody understood it. They looked at the priest just shook his hand. It definitely, it wasn't Latin. It definitely wasn't Latin. So she was speaking in this harsh guttural language. All of a sudden, she was just thrown right off of the kitchen chair, right across the room, and landed in a heap. And of course, Roger said, "Oh my God, Carolyn!" He came over and picked her up, and she wasn't breathing. For all intents and purposes, she was dead. He thought he'd lost his wife right there. He's shaking her, trying to revive her, and all of a sudden she inhales a deep gulp of breath. Well, that's all he could take. So, in not so pleasant language, he physically made Ed go out the door.
Oh
Leave the
my
door
gosh.
and told him, "Don't come back in my house ever." door.
Oh my gosh. So when they decided to leave the house, they left the house. It hadn't been cleared and the spirits were still there.
Yes. Yes.
And then the next person bought the house. Interesting. I
Right.
wonder if what?
Yeah, they did stay there for another several years. They did stay there. So altogether, they were there for just about 10 years. So the spirit activity was not the same after that. It wasn't as forceful, but they knew there was something there. It was. They were never totally left alone. They always knew that there was something there, and it was taking the life right out of Carolyn. And Carolyn said, then again, Carolyn said, Roger, as much as I love this house, I can't spend another winter here. I'll die. So they moved out. And that was the end of their connection with the house until one of the daughters, of course, came back and was the caretaker there.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. One of the daughters, like I was mentioning, one of the daughters did, when somebody else bought the house, she did take care of the house for a while the family was away. And, of course, all heck broke loose while she was there.
Oh.
Now, years later, the woman that owned the house, many years later, Andrea did come to visit with Roger. Roger and Andrea did come to visit, and there was a reporter there from a local magazine that was interviewing Andrea and wanted to know the story of things going on. Meanwhile, Roger went down to the cellar in that house, and again, he felt that feeling. He felt that something was touching his back. Kind of a familiar feeling to him. Something was saying hello to him. Something was caressing him. It's like something that had been very attracted to him, recognized him when he came back. Meanwhile, Andrea's upstairs in the kitchen, and she says, "Oh my God, my father's down there, and something's touching him." She just knew. And she went to go. Suddenly, she was thrown against the wall. She was slammed right against the wall physically.
Oh my God.
Well, after that reporter left. Didn't publish the story. Didn't write any further. Just wanted nothing more to do with it. So they never heard from that reporter again.
Oh my goodness.
The reporter was terrified just being in the house for less than an hour and seeing that happen. This is the real deal, and that reporter was going to have nothing more to do with this.
Oh, man. Do you know if the house is haunted to this day? I think she tried to sell the house, but I don't think she was able to sell it.
Right. The last owner did move out. Her husband unfortunately passed away, so...
Oh, she did? Normal
he
woman?
Did pass away eventually. Yeah.
Oh.
Very, very nice gentleman. Yeah, he passed away. So his wife moved out because she simply was elderly herself. She couldn't manage the house by herself. I have no doubt that there's spirits there. I'm 100% sure there still are spirits there today. Now, unfortunately, the family that lived there did get to be tormented by things other than spirits. When The Conjuring came out, of course, people see movies and they can't separate reality from something they're seeing in the movies. And this, of course, and the movie is set in 1971. People come there, they think they're going to see the Perron family still living there. They're going to see people being thrown around, furniture overturning. So people, every time The Conjuring even was shown on Netflix, there'd be these teenagers, young people would come around, running around their house in the middle of the night, tapping on the windows, peeking in their windows. Now, this is an elderly couple living there.
Yeah.
And they turn around, you see somebody peeking in your window at 12 midnight. And
I know they got pretty upset.
Oh, very upset, very upset. They're on the point of a breakdown, and unfortunately, the husband had a heart condition too, and I felt very bad for him. But I mean, she called the police multiple times. She put up no trespassing signs. She had the house watched by the police, especially on Halloween. But I mean, there's only so much you can do.
Damn.
She couldn't, how's she supposed to know? Gee, they showed it on Netflix tonight. I've got to call the police tonight because there's going to be people here. It just turn around and there's somebody looking in your window with their face pressed against the window, and they think they have the right to do this.
Yeah.
I saw it in the movie, so it's have the public right. They think they have the right to do this, and
they do.
I even had friends, myself and my friends, offered to watch the road sometimes as much as we could, but I mean, there was only so much you could do. You can't be there 24/7, so. So she did wind up moving out, but the house, last time I knew, nobody owns it, or it's for sale or whatever. I have no doubt there's still spirits there. I think there will be, as long as that house exists, there will be spirits there. And I think not all of them are good spirits. I do think, it's my personal belief, and I've known that house, I've known that family for many years. Andrea and I are like brother and sister. We call each other brother and sister. And I had that feeling that you will become part of this family back when I was a teenager. Roger, I call him Dad. I'm still in touch with him. Carolyn, I call her Mom. Carolyn's daughters are like my sisters to me. And but I think there is a demonic presence in that house.
Oh, you do think it's demonic, huh?
Will probably be there for as long as that house exists.
So you think it's demonic, Keith?
Yes. I am 100% convinced it's demonic. And I have been since I was a teenager. Now, again, there were some good things that happened there. I believe there was angelic presence there at times protecting this family and protecting the children. But, yes, I'll always believe 100%. I'm convinced there's a demonic presence in that house.
Wow. All right, hey, we have some questions for you from the viewers,
Sure.
Okay? All right, let me put you on, I'm going to put you on full screen. Okay. All right.
Okay.
So, the first question, Mia Buddha, 61, question. So, if you genuinely don't believe in it, I don't know what she's talking about, can a Ouija board still summon a spirit if you are just looking at it as a game?
I think so, yes. I think so. A lot of people just look upon it as a game, but I think it can summon a spirit, even if you're just playing it as a game. I've known some people that get very scared because the answers they get, and sometimes they get touched, so they just stop playing it. Some people play it as a game for years, and they seemingly have no problems, but again, it only takes that once. But yes, I think it can be dangerous even if used as just a game.
Okay.
If you're not using it for real spirit contact, I think a spirit could still come through.
All right, question from Anthony. What is the worst case of possession you have personally seen?
Worst case of possession involved a 14-year-old boy in Providence, Rhode Island in the 1980s. And this is a family that was involved with Santeria, the Way of the Saints. And the aunt was actually a priestess in the Santerian religion. And this boy became possessed. When he was a young boy, he was out with his family for a walk, and they happened to be walking through a cemetery, whatever reason. He picked up a glove. That glove had an attachment. He was only about 6 years old. He saw a glove. He picked it up. For some reason, that had an attachment, and that attachment grabbed onto his wrist, and that haunted him the rest of his childhood. By the time he was going through puberty, when he was about 13, 14 years old, he started going through actual demonic possession. And this was a very, very authentic case of demonic possession. There was furniture moving. That boy could move furniture. Well, he didn't move it. It was actually the spirit that moved furniture. And, of course, some people might say, well, maybe that was just a poltergeist and it was feeding off his energy. No, this was actually demonic. You got that. It's very, very rare, but I got that same feeling of being drained of energy as I did in the Perron household. It was something very, very sinister, and you would get a warning, what I call an aura. You would get the aura 3 seconds before something happened. You'd feel that. Before you could feel that, suddenly the atmosphere would change, and then he would go under possession. And this boy could spin himself like a top in fast motion. He could do all incredible manifestations. So that's what we actually look for in cases of possession. Of course, we always advise the people, please seek counseling. Even if there's a real spirit problem, you should. It's a traumatic experience. You should seek counseling. But when you have furniture moving, you have extraneous phenomena, severe temperature changes, and things moving. That proves that it is actually a case of possession. That's what we look for.
Do they give off a sulfur smell as well?
Yes, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. All sorts of bizarre smells, but quite often a sulfur smell.
All right, another question from John Johan. My question is how Keith feels about spirit boxes, actual radios, or apps.
Okay. I do not use them. Again, I think that, of course, a lot of times, I mean, you see programs where, it's somebody, it's just a radio blurb and like it's scanning back and forth, and you're making something, you're creating something in your mind of what it says. It sounds like it's saying, it could be a DJ saying hello and somebody hears help. Of course, just your brain is making sense out of that chaos. However, I do believe that sometimes spirits can manipulate electronic devices, and when you're calling spirits in through that, same thing could happen. You could be inviting a spirit in. That's the reason Sandra and I personally do not use them.
Mm-hmm. Another question, Bethany Warner. How would you dispose of a Ouija board?
Very, very good question. Very good question. Certainly, I would not recommend burning it. I would not recommend burning it. That can cause a chain reaction. That can cause it to backfire, a negative reaction. If you're burning something that has an attachment, it could attack. So we advise never to do that. Now, there is a ritual where you could do that, but that's a very, very controlled thing where it has been blessed, and there are very pious people that are guided by the Holy Spirit, and they can dispose of it too. I would not leave it out on the walkway on the stone wall like my sister did. I would not burn it. The best thing you could do is either bury it or give it to somebody that knows how to dispose of it. Some people, recommend leaving it on a church door, but who knows? They could think, oh, this is a satanic cult left a Ouija board on it. They're attacking us. So I would contact somebody who has knowledge of it. Myself, John Zaffis, for example, Bill Bean. Of course, John has very safely contained, along with Lorraine Warren. Of course, their son-in-law, Tony Sperrit, manages a museum. Lorraine has a whole occult museum, and John Zaffis has a museum just filled with these things, Ouija boards and other spirit-connected devices, and statues and stuff. But I would give it to somebody who has knowledge of how to safely dispose of them. And this board here, like the board I showed you. Someday I might give this to John Zaffis, but because he collects these, or other people do for their museums. But I put a note, March 11th, 2017, Saturday, blessed by Keith Johnson in Christ's name, in Exeter, Rhode Island. So
awesome.
That has been blessed. I wouldn't want somebody to play with it and start activating it, but somebody who knows how to dispose of it. Some church clergy do know how to dispose of it. Contact them, or if you don't know anybody, contact myself, John Zaffis, somebody who has knowledge. And you can do an internet search and find out people who have knowledge of disposing of things such as Ouija boards.
Okay, and another question from Carla Spears. Have you ever had a case where you could not get rid of the demon? I have heard in some cases after a while of being possessed, they don't want to remove it. Crazy, but true.
This is true, yes. Some people, they want to have this spirit. We have been in houses where we could not remove it, and most of the time, it's because the client themselves will not cooperate. And I know John Zaffis, he's gotten even much more than I do. He gets terribly, terribly frustrated when people do not follow his advice. You come and bless the house. You give people advice. You ask them to seek counseling. But some people, they just become so accustomed to being afraid, or they sometimes miss the spirit, so they don't want to get rid of it. They wind up inviting it back in. It's sad, but unless the family cooperates and does their part, because we do our house blessing and then we leave. We counsel the family, but then we leave. We don't live there. It's up to the family to follow through. So there have been, unfortunately, a number of times where our hands were tied. We couldn't do anything further.
Damn. All right. From Beat 3 Airspace, Keith, who invented the Ouija?
Oh, well, I've actually got an article here about it. It tells the facts, okay.
Okay.
In a nutshell, the trademark word Ouija was created by combining the French and German words for yes. Ouija boards are printed with an alphabet, numbers 1 through 10, and the words yes and no. Each board comes with a small heart-shaped planchette, which we talked about. But it's supposedly from the netherworld. This Baltimore toy manufacturers, William and Isaac Fuld, bought rights to the game from Elijah Bond in 1892. And when the American spiritualist movement was at its height. The game popularly died out about 30 years later. Parker Brothers bought the rights to the manufacturer new Ouija boards in 1966. Sales reached 2 million the following year. Ouija boards and similar games are card sets that help players communicate with the dead. Are inexpensive but interesting collectibles, and you can buy one at Parker Brothers today. They have the glow-in-the-dark ones today. They have the keychains, the little keychains you hang on your rearview mirror, all sorts of things. Very, very accessible, and you could, of course, make your own. But that's the basic history of the Ouija board, how it came about.
All right, another question from Deborah Schlegel. Keith, have you ever come across a perfect possession, and how do you know that a person is perfectly possessed?
Yeah, I believe I have, sadly, and I do say sadly, I do believe I have come across perfect possession. And you can really suspect when somebody's perfectly possessed with a personality change, but and it tends to come and go. But it's when the person gets some advantage from the possessing entity, that their spirits, that their human soul and the invading entity become so close, it's almost like the same entity. And sadly, sometimes they don't want to get rid of it. So it just, they don't necessarily go into these terrible manifestations where it's attacking them, but sometimes their personality, you can tell it's not them. It's not completely them, and they just don't want to let go of it.
But also, that sounds like an attachment.
Yeah, it sounds like an attachment, but it's when the person's personality changes. You can feel this. You come close to it, they have an attachment, and I believe sometimes this spirit that is attached will sometimes enter into them. It'll enter into them and control them. Sometimes they get certain advantages. It's the whole Faustian trip. You know, somebody's maybe they don't believe that they've sold their soul. They just say, "I'll let you be attached to me for certain advantages," and they get certain advantages from having the spirit. The spirit kind of controls things, but it's very, very sad because that person is really not totally themselves anymore. Sometimes you can come to this person and they're very, very pleasant and everything. All of a sudden you notice there's a dark look to them, and you get it, not just the look, but the feeling you get when you know something's wrong. So I believe I have seen an attachment that does culminate in perfect possession, and very, very hard to deal with this. Very hard to cast the spirit out like that, because the person themselves has to want the spirit out. You can't do anything unless the person wants that spirit and that attachment removed from them. It's like stopping smoking. You know, you can't force somebody through hypnotism unless they themselves agree and really want to have a cessation of smoking.
All right. Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you really sell your soul to the devil for fame and fortune?
I do believe so. Yes. Yes, I do believe so. I believe there are many examples throughout history. Now, again, we know the whole tale of Faust, of course, sold his soul, supposedly sold his soul to the devil for fame and fortune in this life. There have been a lot of people that supposedly have, even people that presently are very much, fame and fortune, but some say they've sold their souls. I think some people don't really believe they have, but so what's the soul? But it just takes, it doesn't take a big ritual necessarily to do that. Where you see like, Dr. Faust slices his wrist and signs a pact to Mephistopheles in blood. It can just be an act of will. It can just be an act of will. I agree to this, and sometimes that's how it will be done. And I believe some people in the I don't want to actually mention any specific names, but to accuse anybody, but some people in the entertainment field even today, I believe are heavily involved with demonic spirits, and in a way they've sold their souls to for these advantages.
And I have too, and they're very wealthy and very well known, very well known. But wouldn't an end come to that eventually, before their time?
Of course, the end would come with the end of physical life. Nobody lives forever, and you see like horror fantasy and everything where somebody's can live on and on through generation. But in real life, our life is very brief. When you think of it, think of somebody who lives 110 years old. That's still, it's a little over a century, but eventually life ends, and it's a very, very, very sad thing. Your fame and fortune is transient. It's always transient. It's not going to live. It's not going to last forever. The most important things to me are my family. Of course, I would love to be financially really, really stable, but the most important things are, and I'm sure you feel the same way, is your family, your loved ones, your health. God bless us for having what health we have. That's what's most important.
Absolutely. All right, we have another question from Mary Ann Culp. If you have the Ouija board blessed, is it okay to use it then?
I think that will just sort of reinfect it. I think that will activate the spirit presence again if it's been blessed. The only reason I bless it is if it's going to be taken into a museum, or the family has asked me to take it. And I know somebody who tried to burn one in his bathroom once, in his shower stall. That didn't go over too well with his wife, but made a big mess. But this one I have here that has been blessed. But I think if somebody tried to use it for spirit communication, it would start all over again.
Really? Yeah.
Eventually, I will get rid of this. I will probably donate it to somebody who will safely have it in their keep, or they'll destroy it, or put it in their museum or something like Johnson-SYFY does. And they're very, very cautious about this. Even with the Warren Occult Museum, the son-in-law Tony Spera, they have a priest that blesses that regularly. Nobody's allowed to touch any items in that museum, and they have a priest bless the place regularly. Lorraine will no longer get in that, because she's very elderly now. But she will no longer. She hasn't set foot in that for years. She will not go near that museum herself.
Oh, her own museum?
Right, her own museum. Her husband used to manage it, and of course now her son-in-law Tony does. But of course Tony is a demonologist. He studied the field for many years. But she will not go in it anymore. She will never go in that. I don't blame her. Yeah. I don't blame her.
All right, we have one last question. This is from Samantha Drelling. There was mention of the slaughter mill earlier. Can you tell a little bit about that? And I want to have either you or your brother. Okay, so you guys, you're a docent there. Well, go ahead and tell him. You're a docent there, and your brother is in charge over there, isn't he?
Yes. Well, yeah. Yes, he has some seniority over me, and but he developed the Mills and Mysteries program, where people can come actually through the mill and take a haunted tour, and he created that quite a few years ago, 10 years ago this year, and it's been very successful. Slater Mill is very historically significant. Samuel Slater came to this country in the late 1700s. He came in 1789. He came to Rhode Island on January 18th, 1790, and he had great knowledge. He had done a 7-year apprenticeship, even though he was a very young man at the time. He would never advance in England because somebody else owned the mill that he had apprenticed at. So it was against the law. British customs forbade anybody coming with mill knowledge, machine knowledge, from sharing the English technology, the secrets, to America. So he took the risk, and he couldn't take any plans with him, but it was all memorized in his mind. So with the financial help of Moses Brown, he basically he contributed a great deal to our industrial revolution. And it's in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, along the Blackstone River. Of course, these machines were originally run by water power. The main building, the Slater Mill, is from 1793. Now, of course, it's a great venture. It's the first modern cotton spinning factory in the country. It's still open for tours. Many school children come there, but of course they all ask, "Is it haunted?"
Yeah.
Now, there was unfortunately part of the success of Slater Mill was something that was basically accepted at the time, and that was child labor. That was very, very prominent, very popular in England. There were no laws against it, so there were child labor. Now, Samuel Slater himself, I must say, was known as a very kind-hearted man. He was very, very professional man. He was good to his children, but along the years, of course, there were many industrial accidents. They didn't even record them for many years because if you're going to advertise people are losing fingers and limbs in this mill, who's going to want to work there? So it's a great place to work. So it did involve industrial accidents and involved child labor, unfortunately. And we think because of that, very, very strange things happen in this mill. Very, very peculiar things. Anything from voices, you hear voices in the air. Now, this is not constant. It's not that somebody's going to walk through there once and just experience it. But when you don't expect it, sometimes you don't expect it. People have been touched. And this is in the middle of the day. We had one of our co-workers up in the attic once, and suddenly somebody just almost knocked him over, pushed him from behind. He turned around, and nobody was there. Nobody was there. So he immediately went and cut Carl. Carl, I have to tell you what just happened. So my brother did start the Mills and Mysteries program there. And, yeah, we've heard voices there. We've recorded a number of EVP there, voices that are recorded on audio. And sometimes you'll hear them audibly without even a recording device. Sometimes you just hear them in the air. People are touched. People have been lightly scratched, which is upsetting, but nobody's been seriously hurt there. There are 3 buildings on the site. The Sylvanus Brown House, which is our oldest building, that's 1758. Of course, Samuel Slater's business partner, Sylvanus Brown, lived there, and that's where Samuel Slater stayed his first night in Rhode Island. That has been known for a number of spirit manifestations in there. People have seen what looks like a little girl or a white form moving around there. They've heard walking upstairs when nobody's there. Also, in Slater Mill itself, we've had strange things go on with the alarm system. One time, one of our staff could not put the alarm system on when he was leaving, even though he knew he was alone in the building. He called the alarm company. The alarm company, the gentleman said, "Are you sure you're alone in there?" He said, "Yes, there's nobody else in the building." The gentleman at the alarm company said, "Well, our sensors show you've got a room full of people walking around upstairs with you there." So,
wow.
And there's been many bizarre things. And then there's the third building is the Wilkinson Mill. That's our new building because it's 1810. We call that our new building. It's 1810. And that was built by Samuel Slater's in-laws who were Quakers. And that was not textiles. Like Slater Mill is textile factory, cotton spinning. Wilkinson Mill is a stone building, and that's to create the machine parts, metal and woodworking. And they say that they see something called a gray man there. They see a gray shadow figure that's been seen walking around there. And that's when people do get touched. When a couple of young girls got scratched there, teenagers. They weren't really hurt, but I mean, it's upsetting when that happens. So my brother tries to have more of a controlled thing where you go through all 3 buildings and you just try to record experiences there.
Wow. Well, that's all our questions, Keith, and I want to thank you. Oh, listen, your books. I've got a picture of your books to show them. Your Paranormal Realities 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
What's in these books? Are these demonic cases?
A lot of them are demonic cases. They're true stories that I've experienced or people close to me experienced. Usually they're personal experiences. Some are historical, and quite a few of them are demonic cases that we worked on. And they're true stories. That's why it's called Paranormal Realities. And fans of Ghost Hunters, TAPS, of course, was the group that was on this TV series Ghost Hunters for 10 years. Many people who are fans of TAPS or interested in that will be able to read stories that happened before the TV show actually came about, before Ghost Hunters, in the early days of TAPS. So some people might find that very interesting. And there's some historic cases, too, that dealt with folklore and how people dealt with folklore, early hauntings in Rhode Island, things that happened like that.
Really? Oh, interesting. I would love to have you come back on the show. It's been too long. I mean, I think before we aired like 3 or 4 shows together, but it was on another network. Well, now you're on my network, and I get to keep the show. It's my video.
Excellent.
And I would love to have you back, Keith. It's always a pleasure.
And before I leave, could I just mention that something that's coming up with me in my life that's going on?
Absolutely.
Okay. One of my loves, one of my great hobbies, of course, doing the demonology thing, that's, something I do I feel I'm called to help people in a spiritual sense. But one of my personal hobbies that I love to do is theater. And that's how Sandra and I met. We met doing a play together years ago. We met in theater. And coming up April 27th, 28th, and May 4th at 6:30 p.m., May 5th at 2 p.m. and 6:30 p.m., I'm in the play Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, I didn't know you did acting.
Yeah. Little known fact about me. See,
hold on. Let me.
Know about people. Yes, Beauty and the Beast, and that's being put on by Johnston Dance and Performing Arts, run by Donna Cordu Tellier, and she's a wonderful, wonderful director. And I have to say, this is a wonderful, wonderful show. Anybody that's seen the Disney movie and the animated feature as well, this is the live stage play that was performed on Broadway and in Los Angeles. So this is a wonderful, wonderful live action telling of the story Beauty and the Beast. And Beauty and the Beast does have a paranormal bent to it too when you think about it.
But this is in where? Rhode Island, right?
Johnston, Rhode Island. That's going on at Johnson High School, and we have some wonderful, wonderful actors and actresses in this. It's just some of these people are very, very young, and I can't believe the incredible amount of talent. It's just wonderful, the talent that we have in this theater group, and this is the first show I've done with them. I play Maurice, I play Belle's, because Belle is the beauty who meets the beast, and I play her father, Maurice, and I'm an inventor, and I very much watch out for my daughter in this as Maurice, and Belle is played by Bryn Martin, a very, very talented actress, and Sarah Brulé, another talented actress. She's going to be doing the matinee on May 5th. She's playing Belle in the matinee performance. These two young women that are playing Belle, they are wonderful actresses, and they have beautiful, beautiful singing voices, and their talent is well beyond their years because they're both young people. But I can't say enough about the show, just how much talent we have in it, and I feel very privileged to be able to work with it. My personal friend Marin Flynn, who's a paranormal enthusiast too, that's how we met. She plays Mrs. Potts, and just so many in this cast, too many to name. The Beast is expertly played by Marlon Chang, a very wonderful actor himself, wonderful singer. He's not a beast in real life. He's a very, very nice guy, but he portrays the Beast. Gaston is our good friend Dave Bano. Of course, he's the villain of the show, and his henchman LeFou, Matthew Eisman. It's just a wonderful, wonderful show that's coming together, and that's going on last weekend of April and the first weekend of May of this year, and I'm very, very pleased to say I'm a part of it.
Oh my God! If I lived back east and near Rhode Island, I would be there in a minute, Keith. I would be there in a minute, honey.
Oh, I'm sure you would. I'm sure you would, and it would be wonderful to have you there. But anybody who can possibly make it, it's well worth it. I tell you, it's more than worth it. It's a wonderful, wonderful production, and just an incredible amount of talent. That people do this for the love of it. You know, not to get rich. They just do it for the love of it.
Oh my gosh, Keith, honey. Oh, and your books now. Your books can be purchased on Amazon, right?
They can be purchased on Amazon. They can also be purchased on our site, nearparanormal.com. If you order one from there, online from us, then you get an autographed copy. I'll personalize it for you.
Oh, awesome. Are you writing any more books?
Yes. I'm working on a book on demonology. And this is a practical approach to demonology. Because, there's times when a lot of people are out on the field, and sometimes it's investigators. They're trying to help people in the house. And questions come up, and I get calls sometimes at 1 or 2 in the morning. And Keith, I'm so sorry to bother you, but it's I know it's late, but I said, actually, it's early. It's early morning. They say, we have some questions. We're in a situation. We need some advice, and I'm happy to give advice. But this is more like a handbook. It's more like a handbook on demonology. If you're in a situation like this, how to handle it. What mistakes I've made and how I've dealt with them, and what advice I would give, and I know Lorraine and Ed went through this. They were getting calls late at night, and John's office, Bill Bean, a lot of us get these calls. So this is a practical handbook with advice. My brother has recently published a book, co-written with his girlfriend, Lana Brock, and he was a demonologist, and so he's written a book on demonology, his personal experiences and theories as well. And I'm sure he'll be glad to talk about that sometime.
I'm showing his picture and his book, Shadow Realms Demonology Handbook. Mm-hmm. Right, I'm showing that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure that could take up a whole show.
Oh, okay. Well, I sent him a message. Let him know that I sent him a message on Facebook for an opening, and I gave him a date. So anytime he wants to come on the show, but I did give him a date. You and your brother are always welcome on my show, and it's always an honor and a pleasure to have you, Keith, always. And I appreciate you coming on the show. It was wonderful. I just enjoy you. I mean, I can just sit here now and just let you talk. I mean, I don't have to ask you any questions.
Well, I appreciate that. It's my pleasure, Maureen. It's my pleasure, Noreen. It's always good to be here, and always good to chat with a wonderful person like yourself.
Thanks, honey. Thank you. You have a wonderful weekend, and my best wishes to your books. And let me know when your other one is published, and have a great time at your play.
Thank you very much. That's why I'm starting to look like a hippie. I'm growing my hair out, so it's supposed to be from 1740. So.
Thanks, Keith. Good night, honey. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Have a great weekend, and let's see what's coming up. Anything? No, nothing's coming up. So, Monica. Oh, yeah. And you can also get show reminders on paranormalzone.tv and click on the little tab that says show reminders. And one of these days, Jordan Perkins, one of these days I will redo my website. I can never seem to get there. So I love you guys. Yes, I love you guys. And it's just wonderful to see you here week after week. So everybody, I'm going to go now. And Jim, the reason I'm late tonight too is because Jim's on the USS Hornet. They have an event tonight, and that's where he is. So he'll be home shortly. And I love you guys. And thank you. Also, thank you every week for those who donate to the super chat. It's really awesome of you to do that, and I love you guys. So I'm going to say good night now, and love you guys. Good night, everybody. I love you. Good night. Oh, this is crazy.